Hi, today I'm in the village of Thundridge in Hertfordshire, which is situated here on the old Ermine Street, and that's its neighbouring village of Wadesmill. In a few minutes we're going to take a walk east along the Rib Valley, and I'm going to show you some villages that I dare say the vast majority of people who live in the county of Hertfordshire have never even heard of. And if they've never heard of them, they certainly won't know their unusual histories. Anyway, got the camera gear, always hopeful for some photographic opportunities. Anyway, let's get going. This is the neighbouring village of Wadesmill, and it might surprise you to learn that Britain's very first turnpike was set up here in 1663. When I was researching the stories that you're going to hear in this video, I came across a rather disturbing case of a man who committed suicide here in this river. This is the River Rib that runs through Wadesmill. In 1893, a local blacksmith by the name of Edwin Bates became so depressed at the state of his business that he threw himself here into the river and drowned. It seems amazing that when you look at the river today and try and imagine what it must have been like 100 years ago. You know, if you throw yourself in there today, you're lucky to get your feet wet. Junction in the footpaths here. I'm going to be taking that path up there, which brings me up onto this little lane, and then up into this rather unusually named village, and then I'm going to do like a 10-mile loop and come back hopefully down this track here. Anyway, let's go. This was once the rather grand entrance to an old manor house, which is just down the bottom of the hill there. And just even though the manor house is there, it seems a shame that they've let the entrance go to ruin like this. Well, as I said, the road gets narrower and now it starts to become enclosed. Spooky. Well, we're about 2 miles from Thundridge now, and we've come to this rather tiny little hamlet with this unusual name. Now this is the hamlet of Cold Christmas.
Believe it or not, this used to be a pub years ago.
One of the surprising things here in this village is this post, and it marks the Greenwich Meridian, which runs right the way through this village. Amazing, eh? The hamlet itself is actually spread out. There's a field that sort of splits it in two, and the rest of it's up here. Nobody knows when this village acquired the name Cold Christmas, but it's how it acquired the name that's rather curious. Sometime in the past few hundred years, Britain went through a very, very cold winter, and over the Christmas period the temperatures dropped so low, well below freezing, that lots of people died. And here in this village, and in some of the surrounding villages, lots of children died. And I'll come back to that later. What a lovely view, eh? We're leaving Cold Christmas now, heading down this lane, and hopefully soon we'll cut off the lane and go across country. Just pulled off the lane for a quick breather. Have a look at this wonderful view right down this valley here, and believe it or not, that is where we're headed, down the bottom of the valley, where there's one village that I doubt if many people who live in Hertfordshire have ever heard of. And of course, if they've never heard of it, they won't have a clue about its amazing history. Right, this is where we leave the lane and take to the footpaths and go across country. Quite warm for October.
wood called Sawtrees Wood, and there's a lovely stretch of hornbeam, coppice hornbeams here, and I was really hoping by this time of the year it would be a blaze of autumn colours, but sadly it's still got some way to go yet. Well, we've almost reached our next destination. I've come to the village of Barwick in East Hertfordshire. This part of the village was originally known as Great Barwick, but there's another part of the village just over the back there, and it's got quite an extraordinary history.
This part of the village is relatively new compared to the first part we visited, and originally back in the late 1800s it was simply known as the Outpost, and in 1888 a company that manufactured gunpowder, the company was called the Smokeless Powder Company, purchased some land here and built a factory where they could produce this very high quality gunpowder. It was mostly used for the military and also for commercial use in mining, etc. But they also used to manufacture bullets and ammunition, especially bullets for the old Martini Henry rifles, which were all manufactured here. This old building here used to be a public house. It was purpose built for the workers in the ammunitions factory back in the 1800s, and it was originally called the Factory Inn. In 1904 it changed its name to the Duke of Wellington, and sadly back in the 1990s it shut its doors for the last time and became a private house. Sad. Dying for a drink. Oh wow, you're not going to believe this. Sometime recently they've grubbed out all the hedgerow here to put this new fence in, and they've unearthed this lovely vintage Bovril jar. Amazing. Still full of dirt. God, it's probably been there over 100 years. Oh, lovely. I've come back round to the first part of the village, Great Barwick, and we're going to take a walk along this trackway, and I'm going to tell you a pretty upsetting story about something that happened here at the ammunition works. These old dilapidated buildings in the fields here, you could easily be forgiven for thinking that they're old farm buildings, but you'd be wrong. These were in fact magazines and storage facilities where they used to store gunpowder and ammunition to keep it well away from the factory. The main part of the factory is where you can see them buildings down there. Some of the old original buildings still exist, and now it's just a modern industrial estate, mostly for timber companies and stuff. But the factory didn't stop there, I can assure you. These woodlands you can see behind me are twice the size now than what they used to be back in the days when this factory was running, and it was absolutely pockmarked with small buildings just like the ones you've just seen. All the magazines were dotted around inside the woods, and they were surrounded by earthworks to protect surrounding buildings in the event of an explosion. We're going to take a walk up through the woods there, and I'm going to tell you about a tragedy that occurred. As you can see, the woodlands are absolutely dotted with these earthworks that were built to protect surrounding buildings in the event of an explosion. These old Victorian walls you see here were actually part of a gateway that led into the woods. The freshly made ammunition and gunpowder was brought over by horse and cart from the factory across the fields through the gateway, and then it was dispersed along trackways to all the various magazines and storage facilities that were dotted around the woods. But it wasn't just storage facilities, there were also purpose-built drying facilities for the freshly made gunpowder. And it was on the 23rd of May 1893 that two employees of the Smokeless Gunpowder Company, Alfred Aylott and Albert Ginn, were working in one of these drying facilities. They were gathering up about 100 weight of dried gunpowder, which they were trying to put into special storage containers, when they noticed a fire at the end of the drying room. And before they could actually escape, the whole building, all the gunpowder in the building ignited in a huge flash explosion. Both men were very, very badly burnt, and they managed to crawl out of the drying room after the explosion, and all the other workers in the area rushed to help them, and they were taken to Hertford Infirmary. But sadly, on the 3rd of June, Alfred Aylott died. And later, on the 13th of June, Albert Ginn died. Albert Ginn was only about 21, and he'd only been married about 4 weeks. How sad. Apart from that terrible tragedy in 1893, the company seemed to have enjoyed a pretty impressive safety record, and there were no other major incidents. Sadly, the company shut down in 1910 and ceased production, but 2 years later, in 1912, it was bought out by a new company called the Sabulite Works, and production of ammunition, explosives and gunpowder continued. In fact, during the First World War, they even patented and produced a new type of hand grenade, which was used in the First World War. And production continued right the way through until 1938, when the company ceased trading altogether. And as you see now, it's just a modern industrial estate with a timber works. Anyway, I'm going to carry on walking down the trackway. I'm going to take you to a couple of other little villages, and I doubt if you've ever heard of any of them. In fact, I'd never heard of either of them until I come out here doing my preliminary research. Anyway, let's get going. We've got another mile or so to go. We're actually just coming into one of the first little settlements that I was telling you about, which is just over there. There's a house just here. You want to see what the guy's got in his garden? Oh, you're going to love this. This guy has got a stag made out of horseshoes. How fantastic is that? We've arrived at a little tiny hamlet by the name of Hertfordshire, which is just tucked away behind those trees there by the river. In fact, this little settlement is so small it's not marked on any maps. Let's go take a look. In fact, this village is so small, one of the main roads leading into it, as you can see, is nothing but a dirt track. It's quite a magical little place by the look of it. Oh, let's go this way. There's only about 3 or 4 cottages here. I like the sign on there. Unsurprisingly, this is the only sign that actually identifies this little hamlet. Well, I'm going to head back over the ford and on to the next village. That cottage with the metal stag in the garden, I'm just walking past the entrance and it's got a very curious name. I've just spoken to the owner of the house and inquired about the origins of its curious name, and sadly it's got nothing to do with somebody getting strung up from a tree. It's more to do with the way the willow trees hang over the river down there. Sad really, that could have been a good story else. Wow, what a lovely place. Almost feel as if I'm back in the 19th century. So tranquil. I love that. Well, that was the charming little village or hamlet of Latchford, which I'd never even heard of until recently. Such a charming little place, you know, you come here and it's almost as if you've gone back in time 100 years or more. It's so tranquil here. It's just another place. Anyway, now I'm going to start heading back, going back through Barwick or Barwick. Apparently it's got different pronunciations, and we're going to end up at what is reputed to be the most haunted place in Hertfordshire. Let's get going. Oh wow, it's looking lovely now. Oh, not too far to go now. Evening's drawing on. Well, I suppose I could walk round it, but what the hell? Ouch. These are the ruins of St Mary's Church, situated on what used to be the original site of the village of Thundridge. Now the original church was built during the reign of William the Conqueror in 1086. The tower you see behind me was a later addition in the 14th or 15th century, and when it was originally built, the church was built on a north-south alignment, which was unusual, as churches were normally supposed to be built on an east-west alignment. And as a consequence of that, the church throughout its history was always regarded with suspicion by locals, because building a church on a north-south alignment basically is a sign of the devil. So as you can guess, the church was never very popular. The village, which was situated in the fields just over here, eventually died out in the late 1600s or 1700s, and eventually it migrated about a mile west to where it is today on Ermine Street, which is where we started off earlier on. The church itself fell into disrepair, and in 1823 it was demolished, although they left the tower standing. But as a consequence of its history and the suspicion surrounding it, it's always been associated with the devil, and of course it's been a magnet for occultists and devil worshippers and the likes. But it's also accrued an enormous number of ghost stories. There are as many ghost stories associated with this church as there are graves here in the churchyard. Some of them are pretty ridiculous or ludicrous. Some of them, you keep an open mind, but I'm going to tell you an interesting story about something that happened here a couple of months ago. Let's go take a look at the church. I mean, the kind of stories that are associated with this church go from people just hearing strange sounds, seeing strange figures, but apparently in 1978 a local lady reported seeing an army of men in helmets and breastplates come running out of the church, and then they ran past her. Sounds like Roundheads to me, but whether you can believe that kind of story or not, I don't know. And until recently this church was actually open, you could get inside it, but for reasons of health and safety, and of course to protect the ruins from damage and vandalism, they've had to brick it up so you can't go inside it anymore, which is a shame really. But if you come around here, there's some interesting graffiti on the wall. Strangely enough, on this north-facing buttress of the church, there's tons of graffiti. Now, some of it's fairly modern, but some of it is undoubtedly quite old. In fact, some of it's actually dated to the 1800s, and you can also tell by the style of lettering that some of this goes back hundreds of years. And oddly enough, that just here there's a crude figure carved in the stonework here. Now, it's hard to speculate what that actually means, but in the days before the Reformation, crosses in Catholic churches used to bear figures such as this. They used to represent some of the disciples or saints, and I'm wondering if during the reign of Henry VIII, after the Reformation, somebody came and carved this saint in the wall, and as it were probably praying for the restoration of the Catholic Church. But that, you know, that's an interpretation, who knows. And strangely enough, it is emblems of witchcraft here. There's an upside down cross, and up there's pentagrams. This is all to do with the occult and black magic. You know, sometimes you get people here at night with the Ouija boards and stuff. But I'm going to tell you a little interesting snippet that happened a couple of months ago. You might remember in the earlier part of the video we visited the small hamlet of Cold Christmas, which is situated up on the hill over there, and how the village apparently got its name due to the fact that sometime in the past few hundred years the country went through an extremely cold winter, and over the Christmas period in particular, temperatures are believed to have dropped so low that lots of children in the village and surrounding villages all died. And it's believed that all those children are buried somewhere here in a mass grave. Which leads me to an incident that happened here a couple of months ago. One night a couple of months ago, I came here acting as a cameraman for a paranormal group who came here that night to test some equipment that they'd developed, like ghost detection equipment and sensors and all sorts, and some of the results were pretty amazing. But about 10:30 at night, when it was really dark, we actually got a guy to stand right here by the door of the church with a witch's scrying mirror. Now, a scrying mirror is a black mirror that witches use. They stare into it and apparently they can either tell the future or tell the fortunes, and you're supposed to be able to see strange things if you stare into it long enough. Now, we set this guy up with this scrying mirror right here, and we actually put a lantern up here for lighting, and I actually set a TV camera up on a tripod right there where the camera is now, to film him, and then we left him alone for about 10 minutes. When we came back, he said he'd heard strange sounds, and he'd said in this mirror he'd seen a strange shadow or a figure standing here in the corner. Now, strangely enough, when I checked the video footage the following morning, my camera had moved itself and focused on this corner for no apparent reason. But not only that, the audio had picked up the sound of a little girl singing "Ring a Round of Roses, a pocket full of posies, at you, we all fall down," and then she giggled. Now, I can't explain that, and sadly I can't show it to you here on this video for copyright reasons. But you know, it depends what you believe in, really. You know, it's whether you believe in it or not. Most people who come here, they all say this place has got a terrible atmosphere, and they're not kidding, really. You know, it certainly has an aura about it, but it's a strange place, and it's reputedly the most haunted place in Hertfordshire. Well, it's getting late, the sun's going down. Time for a few photographs around the yard, and then off we go home. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time. Wow, ain't this beautiful?